You are listening to Radiant Creators, a collaborative project composed of people whose passion, purpose, and dedication requires forging their own unique path of empowerment and livelihood. A Radiant Creator isn't making a living, they are living.
I guess we'll just get started. So, Good morning, Scott Chapman of supergsminfo.com. So Scott's an interesting character. We wanted to get him on the show. He's got quite a background that led him to where he's at. Scott Chapman is a former Army Ranger and former high-threat security contractor. Now Scott is a public speaker and independent solar researcher whose current mission is a grand solar minimum knowledge call to action. So unable to find a comprehensive beginner guide or basic 101 presentation for the grand solar minimum that is approaching, that we're in right now, he created his own. And so this is Radiant Creators. Probably should have already said that. RadiantCreators.com. Scott Chapman's on the show. And we're going to try to, within an hour, have everybody walk away having a much greater understanding of what is a grand solar minimum. And I'm sure much more will follow along those lines. This is going to be good. So good morning, Scott. And how are things going? How's my description? Does that sound good? About right?
That was great. Thanks for having me on, Craig.
Yeah, thank you. So the truth is always inspiring. And so when a person starts understanding what a grand solar minimum is, it's almost like you're Neo and you wake up in your pod and you look around and you go, oh shit, you know, and then the next thing you know, you've got Morpheus saying to you, welcome to the real world. And you don't like it, but you're glad to be there, even if it's difficult. So I guess your presentation is about 2 hours long. So maybe we could start with a little bit of your background, how you got there. Like, what's giving you the passion to get out there and do these presentations, and how are they going? And then we'll just move into more details about the grand solar minimum.
Sure. So how I kind of stumbled upon this was essentially by chance. I owned a security company from 2015 until 2018. So for 3 years, I owned this small security company down in South Florida, and I had copious amounts of time on my hands because the majority of our work was overnights. So I had pretty high standards in employee selection, and we grew pretty fast. We were pretty successful. So I constantly found myself working overnights in a security guard capacity. So it was during that time when I was essentially a captive audience to myself. I would just study anything that I've ever wanted to learn. So I've always been a pretty big fan of science. So I would study some pretty heavy science topics just to try and test myself to see if I could just figure this stuff out. So I would study things like string theory and gravity and time dilation, and just really just listening to lecture after lecture after lecture, just trying to just sort of piece it all together, understanding about Einstein, and I saw it really as a challenge because my employees would drive all night long. So I was in my security car for 10, 11, 12 hours a night just by myself. I was a captive audience. I couldn't do anything else besides listen to lectures. And if I'm going to have all this time to myself, I don't want to waste it listening to music or anything else. So through that time, through that time understanding science and studying science, I always say that helped me develop the right perspective. And perspective is everything in the presentation. In order to understand the GSM, you really need to change the way you think. And I think that my time diving into these really heavy science topics helped me sort of broaden my perspective and put on a big lens. I had sort of reached the kind of end of my interest of what I wanted to learn about. I studied anything I could think of, and I wouldn't just study the topic. I would study the count the point and counterpoint, and both sides of the conversation, just to try and get the full rounded story of whatever I was learning. So a friend of my wife, she said, "Hey, you should check out this show called Adapt 2030. I think you'd like it." And I just saw you interviewed David Dubine yesterday, or you posted it yesterday.
Yes.
Yep. Great interview, by the way. So I started listening to this, and what I heard David Dubine talking about was some of the same things that I had recently learned about ancient civilizations and cataclysm events. But he was also talking about the sun and cycles, and so he was talking my language, but some things I didn't quite understand yet. So I said, hold the phone here. What's going on? How can I possibly, how can this be true? There's no way this could be true. So I essentially at that time I jumped in with both feet. I subscribed to every single channel, and 10, 11, 12 hours a night, I wouldn't just listen to the nightly broadcast. I would listen to all the archived shows as well. So it was a very unique opportunity for 3 years. I was able to just consume myself in the GSM. After a few months, I realized that the message is so broad, it's so gigantic that it's difficult for these presenters to sort of accurately and precisely convey what's happening. So I contacted each of them individually, asking, "Hey, man, do you have a one-on-one video? I don't have time to dive into this. I was looking for sort of the cliff notes." And I realized that no one had that. So I saw a void in the industry, a need in the industry for some kind of condensed version, where people don't have the amount of time that I had to jump in and study this stuff. They needed a quick guide. So I started saving every chart, every graph, every video, everything that I found in the course of all my study. I saved everything that I thought was essential for the beginner's guide that I was going to eventually make one day in the future, but I just wanted to put it in one location. So after I assembled it all, and I'm looking at all these charts and graphs and links and PDFs, I'm realizing it's a puzzle, and that's all it really is. It's just a puzzle. So it just, for the first time now in human history, we have access to all the puzzle pieces. We have the sum of human knowledge at our fingertips, on this stupid little cell phone. Everything that we were or are or ever will be is accessible now on this stupid phone. So for the first time now, all the information is available. So, and I'm looking at it in front of me, and I'm realizing, these are just puzzle pieces. So it just takes time to put it in the right order, and that's essentially all I really did was I just put the pieces in the right order to convey a clear, concise message.
That makes sense. That's something I like about the presentation. I definitely would steer people to Scott Chapman's site, supergsminfo.com, and you can download the presentation there. It's the PDF, 70 pages plus, I think. And what I like about it is when learning about the grand solar minimum, I think something that we're up against is, it's just like in the Matrix that I'm, quoting a lot this morning. When Neo first was on the Nebuchadnezzar and he realized that everything in life was not as he thought it was. In fact, it wasn't even real. He barfs.
Right.
It's very, very shocking. And they even say
Right.
we don't pull people out past a certain age because they can't deal with it. And something that your presentation is helping with, and something that you are helping with, is there's a lot of people who have a tremendous amount of bias. I mean, Al Gore won the Nobel Peace Prize talking nonsense. Now, I don't know if he knows it's nonsense or not. I don't know. Characters like that are just used, so who knows? But it's not true. And what do you feel that we're up against, and how are you getting past that with people? And we'll go more into what the grand solar minimum is. We'll get more into the details of what it is, but do you feel that in your presentations that you're helping people get past the cult, the religion, the extreme bias that we've been programmed with for years, that global warming should not be challenged, and that you're a denier, you're bad if you do? I mean, it must be very difficult taking real data and then showing people, like in your presentations, how are people reacting to that? How are you getting past that? Is it working?
Right. Good question. So I just recently returned from Texas, where I was asked to go out to Texas and speak to a group of people and present my lecture. And the room was completely novice to anything about the sun. Most people didn't even realize the sun operated on a cycle. And before the meeting took place, I talked to the event organizers, and it was a pretty select group of people. I explained, listen, I don't want to have any sharpshooters in there. I don't want to have anyone who's going to come in there with an agenda to interrupt me, poke holes in my story. This is my lecture. So what the event organizer told me was, everyone who's invited does not believe in global warming. Everyone knows something is going on, but they can't figure it out yet. They know something is up, but they don't see it yet. And I think that's what a lot of people are starting to wake up to. I think they're realizing that something is happening with the planet that they can't explain, they can't fully grasp yet, and they don't know what to do, and they're constantly being fed global warming, to the point where it's almost a religion now. It's difficult for some people to change their mind, because we as humans, whatever we learn first in our life is what we hold to be true, is what we hold the measuring stick to. So you have a whole generation of people who have been indoctrinated, brainwashed their entire lives. So any hint that they may have been lied to is just glosses over, that they don't get it. So I view this sort of as like a triage scenario, where the people who are ready to receive the information will receive it, and the ones who have their feet in the ground, who planted, rooted in the ground, and they don't want to hear it, then they're not going to hear the message. They're not going to understand it until there's food shortages, and even then they're going to blame global warming. So, the facts of the facts are the facts. Not everyone's going to make it through this, in one piece. So I'm going about this sort of as a triage scenario. Is I'm helping the people who are ready to be helped, and helping guide them through the information when they're ready to be helped, and the ones who are giving pushback and fighting is just I'd rather invest my time in people who understand it, who are ready to hear it, than try and convince a small population that this is really happening.
In the presentations you're doing, are you finding that a remarkable amount of people have that splinter in their mind, like they know something's not right? They're hearing the global warming, well, nobody can miss it, the global warming bandwagon. Does it seem that more people than we might expect, since you're in it closer, does it seem that more people that we would not expect are actually questioning it?
Oh, yes, sir, absolutely. So when I went to, just to follow up on my Texas thought, when I went to Texas to speak with those people, and now the people in this meeting, I gave 3 different talks. The first talk was 30 minutes, and the second 2 talks were both 2 hours each. Total about 30 people. And these were CEOs. These were all C-suite executives. These were forward-thinking business executives. These were owners of energy companies, owners of oil companies. These were food distribution company owners. These were commercial farmers. These were industry leaders of their respective industry. And these are all owners and CEOs, so very intelligent people. And by the end of the 2 hours, I could see every one of their body language had changed. I can see that it was almost a oh shit kind of feeling. One gentleman looked physically ill. So the event organizer afterwards, he told me that the feedback, did nothing but praise, and he said very good things, about 95% comprehension acceptance. So I was able to take essentially brand new beginners who knew nothing about the sun, who didn't even know that we have a magnetosphere. People who knew nothing, about solar wind or solar cycles. So they knew nothing, and I took them from understanding what a drop of 8 watts per meter squared of TSI means over 11 years. And once they can understand that with the proper context and historical references, then I could see a change on their face. I can see it when it clicked. It's about halfway through the lecture is when I see their eyes get big and they finally see what I'm talking about. But it's a step by step process to walk them through it. And part of my introduction, I explained to them that it's not a presentation where I just barf out science and numbers and statistics and chart after chart after chart, because people don't remember numbers, but people remember stories. So I present it like a story. It's a story of us as a species. It's a story of our past and a story of our future, because we have to know where we were to know where we're going. So people hold on to the information because I connect the dots and help them really see the big picture.
You definitely do. And that's one thing about the presentation I'd point people to is, if you're a person who likes data, if charts and graphs speak to you, this is a great presentation to download. Because if you follow David Dubine, Adapt 2030, Ice Age Farmer, there's many people on YouTube to follow. You're going to see a lot of the charts and graphs that are in Scott's presentation. And so here you can get them all in one spot, and it makes it very convenient. And it helps you understand it. One of the reasons your presentation speaks to me is I trade cryptocurrency. I'm a trader. That's what I do for a living. And I used to do stocks a long time ago, then I stopped. But I've always felt that traders, commodity traders, people who are trading in grain futures and oil and such like that, I learned way back in the early 90s that they know what the world is doing more than politicians, more than anybody else. And the thing about your presentation is it really comes from that perspective. Here's the data, here's charts and graphs. We know this about history. All these things have happened. These are cycles, and they're just repeating. This is a larger season than humans expect, because we don't see it. We think winter, summer, winter, summer, winter, summer. We don't have a concept of a grand solar minimum. We don't have a concept of the warm period between ice ages and such like that, because we're just living, it's spring, it's fall, we don't think about these things. So something that I saw on actually an Adapt 2030 video was he was saying within 6 years we will be in temperatures similar to the Mander minimum of 1645 to 1715, known as also the prolonged sunspot minimum. And let me see if I can find that. Well, I guess while I look for that, let's start into what is the grand solar minimum, because we are in the next few years really going to be in it. And like you say in your presentation, those who are paying attention will have final confirmation at the end of 2018, early 2019. In 2 to 3 years, the deaf and blind will know something's wrong. Got David Dubine saying we're headed right now really into something very similar to the Mander minimum, which happened back in the 1600s. So, or 1700s, you could say. So what is the grand solar minimum? What are we moving in? What can we expect? Because this is going to get intense very soon. It already is.
Right. So first off, before I explain it, let me just the caveat here is I'm not a scientist. I've got a pretty heavy military background. I'm a business owner, but I'm not a PhD scientist. So I always just stick to the facts. Everything that I've read, every paper that I've read, every video, every chart, everything that I've read is open source, and it's from people with credentials. So what I often say is that I'm standing on the shoulders of geniuses, where each one of these scientists is compartmentalized, but I've been able to see the wide lens, the full view. So I've taken all of their research and put it in one condensed version. So nothing what I'm saying is my own thoughts and theories. It's essentially just I'm able to parrot what great minds have been saying for years and years and years. So what is the grand solar minimum? So my elevator, I've been struggling with an elevator pitch because it's almost as difficult to explain the GSM as it is to comprehend it. It's very difficult to understand, and that's why it takes me 2 hours in my lecture, because it's a process to change the way people think. In order to truly understand it and have the put on the wide lens, you need the full 2 hours, and that's been a kind of a difficult thing to get past because it's hard to explain it in an elevator pitch. So, what is the GSM? So, for the people who don't know, the sun operates on cycles. There's cycles, and we can measure these cycles by counting sunspots. So every 11 years, right? This is your 11-year window, right? Start to finish. Let me go this way. There is reduced sunspot activity, and then there's increased sunspot activity, and then there's reduced sunspot activity. So in this little 11-year window, you have a graph that goes more sunspots, less sunspots, okay? So it's not just about counting sunspots, right? The sunspots tell us what the sun's magnetic fields are doing, okay? So let's go back to that little 11-year time frame, okay? So when we're down here at the minimum of the 11-year cycle, that's when the magnetic fields are flipping. Because every 11 years, the sun's magnetic fields, North Pole and South Pole, flip. So when the magnetic fields are in their, I call it home position, their North and South Pole position, when the magnetic fields are locked in where they're supposed to be, that's when we see the most amount of sunspots. Because the sun is in harmony, the sun's in sync, the sun is doing what it's supposed to be doing, right? Its vibration is in sync with itself. So the magnetic fields are singing. So when it's all in harmony and sync, that's when we see the most amount of sunspots of that 11-year cycle, right? And then as the North Pole and the South Pole flip, as the magnetic fields flip, when they get more and more out of sync, that's when we see a drop-off of sunspot activity. So understanding that 11-year cycle, understanding that process is the foundation of taking a step back and a step back and a step back to get a wider and wider lens. So once you understand that, it's not about counting sunspots. It's about what the sun's magnetic fields are doing, whereas the sunspots just are an indicator of what the magnetic fields are doing. So these 11-year cycles, okay? Now there's groups of them. So put them together. Let's say there's a group of 11-year cycles that are weaker than the cycles to the right and to their left. So this is a cluster of 11-year cycles. So all the minimum is a collection of 11-year cycles that are weaker than the cycles to the left and to the right. And if you stand back a bit further, it just looks like a big sine wave, right? Up and down, up and down. And the further you go back, there's more clusters of these cycles together, just creating another a sine wave, up and down, up and down. So once you have the right lens, once you stand back far enough and you see the big picture, then it becomes clear. After a maximum, right, comes a minimum. And there's different kinds of minimums. John Casey explains it beautifully when he talks about, let's say you're standing on a train track, and you know every 20 minutes there's a train, right? Every 20 minutes, train comes by, train comes by. Well, that's the 11-year cycle. Now, what you don't realize is there's a 25-minute train. So sometimes a 20-minute train and a 25-minute train arrive at that cross at the same time. When both of those cycles, when both of those trains arrive at the same time, it's a much, much deeper minimum because the sun's magnetic fields are more out of phase. So there's cycles within cycles within cycles. So what happens if the 20-minute train, the 25-minute train, the 30-minute train, and the hour train all arrive at the same time, right? Then you have a super grand solar minimum. You have a much, much deeper low. Does it make sense?
Oh no, it completely makes sense. It's a very good elevator pitch. It's a very good start for it because it helps us understand what the sun is doing. It has larger seasons than we as humans are going to recognize. You know, we're not going to get what's going on in this moment unless you know the history. So when you know where you've been, you know where you're at means. And so right now we're moving into the grand solar minimum, and one of the things to look at is the TSI, the total solar irradiance. Right. And during the monger minimum, it was about 1,363. And right now, we're predicted by 2040 to be about the same level, 1,360. And so we can look back at that time, and between 1645 and 1715, and we can see what was happening then. And you realize, yeah, it wasn't so good, a lot of problems. So what are we going to start seeing now as we move into a grand solar minimum? So let's get into, I guess we can get into more details. I can certainly mention stuff like the Maunder minimum that I already have, and during the Maunder minimum, there was only 2 of the sun's magnetic fields were out of phase, and now it looks like 4 of the sun's magnetic fields are out of place. So, like, what does that mean? It seems like the minimum that we're moving into, from what we know from data, that's very clearly presented in your presentation that can be found over at supergsminfo.com. It seems like this one's going to be extreme, or at least it's going to be equal to ones that we've seen in the past. So what are we in for? This is a big deal.
Right. So in my online personality and my lecture series, and even in the presentation PDF, I go to great lengths not to be a fearmonger. It's very easy where someone could try and incite fear and just scare people, and that's not my intention whatsoever. My intention is to simply present the facts. I'm a very logical person. It's black and white. These are the numbers. This is what it is. So what I don't do in my lecture or online is I try very hard not to give predictions as to what to expect culturally or in your neighborhood. We can talk about what we saw in history. We can talk about what happened in the past, so we can expect what to happen in the future. But it's hard to get into predictions in this community or in any kind of scientific community, because your reputation is really all you have. I don't want to say, by 2021, there's going to be no more avocados, and then there's avocados, and then now everything I've ever said is wrong, But we know that we're seeing food shortages. What I tell people is the signs and symptoms are all around you. You just need to know what to look for. Once you plug in the cooling sun variable, once you plug that into the equation, everything that you see happening around the planet, right, with the weather and geopolitical, it makes sense. So we can look at history and look around the planet to see where we're going to go. So that's kind of a long intro to a short answer.
No, it makes sense.
So what we should be expecting to see is food shortages. Through all of my research, understanding this as thoroughly as I do, is the very first indication that we're closer to mass awareness is food shortages. Because most people, when you try and explain, what's happening to the sun, you kind of get glossed over, and they don't really see it until it affects them. All right, because our memory is so incredibly short. We live to be, 70, 80, 90, 100 years is a big deal, but we don't have the depth of knowledge, or we don't have the memory to truly see like what's really happening. So people typically won't take action until they're directly affected. So the first indication that they're going to be directly affected is rising food prices. And we just had an event in March, the flooding event in the USA, where we lost 38% of our stored food supply. I mean, it's just incredible. And that's from the USDA. Now, the reason why it was so high is because these farmers were stockpiling these grains on their properties to ride out the trade war. So it was a huge blow to our food supplies. A lot of these farms are reporting zero crop production for this year. They're not even going to try to rebuild their farms. So the first sign that an unaware person is going to see is rising food prices. Why is bread so expensive? How come there's no bananas? How come there's no avocados? What's going on with all the food in the grocery store? So that's going to be the first sign and symptom where the unaware are going to see it. And then once food prices increase, people can't afford them, and people are going to get priced out of food. People are going to be, they don't have any more, they won't have as much or any expendable income. All their money is going to be spent on just feeding themselves. And you touched on it a little bit in your interview with, I think it was Diamond or Dave, I forget. I watched them both back to back. We talked about how important food is. We don't realize how fragile we are as a species. We're fragile creatures. We're simply cavemen with cell phones. We don't. We're always 3 meals away from total anarchy. I mean, at any time of day, 3 meals away from complete collapse of our civilization. It's So anyway, so we're not as civilized as people think we are. I've spent about a decade in the Middle East, so I know how savage we could be. So someone who's hungry will do anything to quench that hunger. David Dubine talked about it in an interview yesterday when he's talking about people had recipes to boil their belts, or people ate the glue off the wallpaper, right? So people will do anything to quench that hunger. So there's nothing more important in your life than your ability to put food in your mouth 3 times a day. On a basic level, that's it. That's the only thing that's important. So once that becomes in jeopardy, right, then things will unwind quickly, because people don't have home farms anymore. The victory farms they used to have in the 1940s, or if you look at history, if during these past minimums, people still lived off the land. People grew their own food, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But even then, they still starved to death. I mean, look at the Jamestown settlers. These were hardened settlers. These were people who were professional settlers who understood the importance of raising your own crops and growing your own food and storing your food throughout the winter, and how to survive. And their mortality rates were catastrophic, and they're professional settlers. So I think we have a pretty hard time coming up, some pretty difficult times coming up in the future if we don't start growing our own food.
No, we absolutely do. And something about studying the grand solar minimum, the sun cycles, is that it gives history more meaning. And
right.
It's something that using the word enjoy probably doesn't sound very sensitive, but one of the parts that I enjoy about the study is a great book that I'm reading right now by Will Slater, Life, Death, Rhythms of Ancient Empires, Climatic Cycles Influencing Rule of Dynasties, A Predictable Pattern of Religion, War, Prosperity, and Debt. So it's an amazing book. I'm only just getting into it right now, but it covers, let's look at the sun cycles, and let's look at history, and let's look at the rise and fall of empires, and it explains a lot. And I think it's something that you mentioned in your presentation too, is, during the War for Independence, George Washington crossed the Delaware River. It was frozen. And if you've ever stood there, it's a wide spot where we think he crossed, and you think he walked across that. I mean, I in my lifetime have never seen the river frozen. So definitely there have been very, very different climates on this earth historically. And so when you start to study that history, it will, I believe, help give a person their mind back, because then when you look at current events, what's going on, you're seeing it from a much broader perspective and you understand it. Yeah. And I'm definitely not into the fearmonger part either. And I think maybe that's, maybe it's the military experience that helps. It's like, you're not helpless. Don't be pathetic. What happens to you is up to you. You can, and that's what we really want to do, right now on Radiant Creators is, this is the most important issue that there is. And so we're still going to do all the kind of interviews that we're doing, but this is definitely inspiring, because truth is inspiring, freedom is inspiring, being able to live with your own sovereignty and your own self-determination is inspiring. And this enables people to it seems like the powers that be want us to walk into the maximum disaster, when it comes to this. And, well, there's a rising consensus that isn't in agreement. And like you were mentioning, more people than we might think don't quite buy this. So we just want to help that. That's our real desire, is to... Because when the general consensus starts to understand what a grand solar minimum is, and it's not that hard to get, and once you see the real science, the real charts and graphs, you look at it, it's so evident that I do believe people can give up people do quit cults. They do.
Right.
It has happened. And we really want to present this in a way that... one of the great things about doing it in a podcast form like this is the person can listen to it by themselves. I find that people change their minds. They change their beliefs by themselves. They never really do it when they're challenged. They just greater in battle themselves. But when they can just listen to something on their own, they can let it start to sink in and they can make those changes. Because for one thing, a lot of people are looking at having a huge shift in perspective and going against the global warming cult. I mean... It's difficult. You lose friends and family. You can't talk about it at work,
Right, exactly. And it's tough to walk around with this kind of information. It's really tough to know what I know and to kind of go about my day like everything is fine. When I know I call it the monster on the horizon. It's happening whether people know about it or not, and the clock is ticking. And it's coming. So no matter what, it gives me more motivation to continue doing this. So when I first started this endeavor, I posted all of my I created an online pseudonym as Charles Scott because I didn't want to post anything about global cooling under my true name. All right, because I owned a business, I friends and family who were global warmists, and I didn't want to open that box yet until I knew enough where I could be comfortable, showing my face and linking my true name to what's going on. I think Tony Heller, Steve Goddard did the same thing. He originally posted under a pseudonym, is because there's so much. I mean, to be frank, there's so much hate. I mean, it's disgusting. What Twitter has become. I've spent, I told you about a decade going back and forth to the Middle East, and I think that time has really. It's like I'm living in a time capsule. So I've come back now to the world. I don't really, to a country I don't recognize anymore. I mean, people are so divided more than ever right now. Why I created this thing is I realized that I don't have the financial means to protect my family the way I know I need to protect them. So I've armed myself with knowledge. I've made myself a subject matter expert in an attempt to gain the right attention, to use this as an endeavor or as a means to help as many people as possible to make myself maybe I don't want to say icon in the community, but make myself I don't know how to describe it. To make myself a subject matter expert so the community will protect me and my knowledge when the system collapses, because no one's going to know what's going on. And here I put together. Here's the roadmap of what's happening. So you talk about in your intro about carving your own path, and that's funny you say that because I always say that to my friends is I'm carving my own way. I don't have an instruction manual. No one's giving me pointers and tips on what to do or say this or post this, or no one told me to build this presentation. Is I saw a need and I'm plowing my own way, and I'm essentially swimming upstream by myself. I've lost friends over this. Even some family has stopped talking to me. People think I lost my mind. People think I've truly gone insane. And to their credit, when I first finally became public with explaining this, I was just bubbling over with information. I was bubbling over, and it's like I told you earlier in this presentation or in this interview, it's almost as difficult to explain what's happening than it is to comprehend what's happening. So I had all this information. I had years of just studying all this information, and I had enough, and I need to tell someone about this. My closest people in my life, my family, and my closest friends, and I explained like a fire hose, just like I would just go on and on and on and on and on, and then this and then this and then this, and I was almost manic the way I was explaining this, and I can see the look on their faces, that the wrinkled forehead, and I'm just reading their body language. I can tell that they weren't buying any of it. They'll leave and I'll pop back in their lives a few weeks later and barf a bunch more science on them and come back and forth. So it's through trial and error where I realized, okay, that's not working. People think I'm insane. So let me go about it in a different way. Let me put it down in a PDF, and then that's when I put the pieces together in the right order. And I realized, it's a puzzle. So let me put it in the right order. And then now when I present it to strangers or beginners, it clicks. And it's unfortunate that I practiced my delivery on the closest people in my life. So some of them just don't get it, and they're probably not going to get it. I realized if someone doesn't understand it on the first delivery, then they're almost more turned off to it. They're completely shut off to it. If you lose them in any way along the path of the story, they just completely shut down, and that's it. Again, this is through trial and error. I've failed more times than I've succeeded at helping people understand this. But now that I've figured out the format, it's pretty easy to help people understand it now.
We are moving into a time of the autodidactic. The subject matter expert doesn't have a PhD. I think
Right.
that we historically tend to think, well, you can't have an opinion, you don't know anything unless you've got your PhD. Unless somehow you're a validated scientist or and it makes sense. I would prefer my brain surgeon to be a PhD. I'll go with that. But you can still be a subject matter expert, and you can know a tremendous amount about the sun, the climate, the grand solar minimum, cycles historically. So I do think that we're moving into a time, and you're an example of it, of experts in a very specific field, a very specific aspect of something. And that can be hard to overcome too, because people will say, well, you're not a scientist, you're not a this or that, and it's hard to get past that bias. But I think that those that have that bias, they're probably not going to buy it anyway, no matter who presents it. So really, I think it does help to have better heroes too. I do admire the courage that people have put forth in presenting this information. A great one is John Casey, who did Upheaval and Dark Winter. Essential books, they're amazing, and he definitely, he had to bear the brunt of a lot of slings and arrows. And you even look at John Hancock, who wrote Fingerprints of the Gods and such. A little bit different, but it's very alternative archaeology and such like that. So I do tend to find, I guess you say, strength in just looking at the heroes, looking at people who have suffered and have been putting it forth. And I don't know, I'd rather hang out with them. I'd rather be in league with them and just take a lot of shit from people. That's fine. I can take it,
Right.
I think an advantage we might have in presenting it, or maybe a certain passion, is in the military. You've been to the Middle East. You've been there, and as a security company, you've been there. You've seen it. I didn't spend too much time in the Middle East in that way, but where I did get a lot of experience was in Somalia. Mm-hmm. And so, right at the end of Black Hawk Down, that movie, that's where we showed up after all the heavy fighting. And I was there for 4 months. And so I can't say that Somalia was ever a first world country. I don't think so. But it was Stone Age when I got there. Right. And I think I have an incredible advantage we have is having seen the amazing ingenuity of society. I was amazed that, Somalia, second world. I don't know what they were. I don't think it was first world, but they certainly had ambulances, power, and running water and things like that. And the next day they didn't, or in a very short time they didn't. And how there was a lot of upheaval. There certainly was, but humanity does continue, and it has a natural organizing principle. And I'd rather be a part of that. Like, okay, these things are going to happen. Well, I've been astounded and given faith in humanity when I looked at how in Somalia they went from everything's working, nothing's working, disaster, to rebuilding a city that was functional in a very short amount of time, without power, without running water, without safety, without law. Humans are pretty damn resilient. They are.
Right.
And so as we move into this, let me ask you a question or two. So this is from your presentation, and you mentioned that in July 2018, we detected the most amount of cosmic rays to ever hit the Earth in recorded history. We're living in a cosmic ray maximum. This is another sign of an incoming ground solar minimum. And with that, can we expand upon what the cosmic rays are, and how exactly is that intensity of cosmic rays going to affect us, or how might it possibly affect us?
Sure, it's a long explanation for an easy question. So cosmic rays are extremely important, and the GSM presenters always talk about them, but it's difficult to fully grasp how important they are until you really jump in and see the big picture. So there's cosmic rays that come from our sun, and there's cosmic rays that come from outside of our galaxy. Those are called galactic cosmic rays, and both cosmic rays are the same thing. It just depends on where they originate from. So cosmic rays are they travel at light speed or near light speed. They're protons, neutrons, positrons, electrons, atomic nuclei traveling at near light speed. So we have a magnetic shield around our planet called the magnetosphere, right? And then that magnetosphere blocks these cosmic rays and galactic cosmic rays, okay? So without our magnetosphere, we wouldn't survive for 1 second, right? It holds our atmosphere in place. It blocks solar wind. It blocks from radiation, right? It keeps our wind patterns in place. So that magnetosphere is weakening, okay? Well, why is it weakening? It's weakening because the sun's heliosphere is weakening. So the sun controls not only our planet, but every planet in the solar system. So the sun has a magnetosphere, we call it a heliosphere, that extends out past Pluto. It's gigantic. And that blocks also galactic cosmic rays from invading our solar system. Well, as the sun cools, as the sun enters a minimum, as those magnetic fields leave their home position, right, as all four of those magnetic fields leave their home position, the sun shuts down. It goes into hibernation. So when the sun goes into hibernation, that heliosphere, it also shrinks, right? It comes in. When the sun's heliosphere shrinks, our magnetosphere also shrinks and gets closer. It gets weaker. So it's connected. The sun is connected to our planet through gravity, through energy, and through magnetism. So the reason why we're experiencing the most amount of cosmic rays is because the sun is descending into an extremely deep minimum. Is that?
No, it definitely makes sense. Yeah. Now something's going to ask you about, and you've covered it to some extent, is the magnetosphere density and how the sun affects that. And I love your definition in your presentation about it being like a
magic windows.
Yeah. If you could mention like that, I don't want to read it, but like right there, that amazing
right.
Yeah, that definition you've got. So our
magnetosphere is a magnetic shield around our planet that protects us from solar wind, cosmic rays, stuff that would immediately end our civilization. So without our magnetosphere, we'd essentially turn into Mars. So that magnetosphere, it stays it stays dense and it stays tight because the sun is constantly pushing solar wind on it. So think of it like magic windows in your house. Okay, so you have these magic windows. When there's a hurricane approaching, there's a lot of wind, strong wind, so the windows immediately turn into hurricane shutters, and they protect from the strong wind. Well, the hurricane passes, and now it's a slight breeze, and then they turn back into single pane windows. Well, what happens if there's no breeze whatsoever? If there's no wind, well, then they turn into a screen mesh. So the magnetosphere gets more dense the more energy it blocks. So when there's nothing to push up against the magnetosphere, it puffs out. It gets weaker. It gets bigger. Right? It extends. So then it allows in more cosmic rays.
No, that's perfect. I really wanted to cover that. That's great. And I'm just going to ask a couple cool questions. One is, in your presentation you mentioned, I think this is a big one. This just helps people understand the depth of research that you've put into this. Clouds are not the result of climate. Rather, climate is the result of clouds. So cosmic rays and clouds, what is that relationship?
Right. Oh, that's a good question. That statement you just read is from Henrik Svensmark's Cloud Mystery, and I've watched that about a dozen times. As a brilliant video series, or brilliant video, where he had a theory that an increase of cosmic rays caused an increase of clouds, and that idea and that theory wasn't welcomed by the global warming community. So he went to the Large Hadron Collider. He went to CERN and he proved it. Where when we see an increase of cosmic rays, well, we have an increase of cloud coverage. Well, why is that? It's about the process to cool the planet is exactly that. It's a process. It's a step-by-step process. And volcanoes are a major player in the process to cool the planet. Well, why is that? Because they produce millions of tons of aerosols that launch into the atmosphere. So the threshold is 50,000 feet. Once the ash plume gets above 50,000 feet, these aerosols, these particulates, they will remain in the atmosphere for years or decades to come. Okay, so stay with me because I'll get to cosmic rays in a second. So it's nearly impossible for one water molecule to attach itself to another water molecule. It's nearly impossible because you can't attach two magnets of the same polarity. You need something in the middle to have them bind to. Well, these particulates, these aerosols from volcanoes, act as a binding agent. So they're the hosts for water vapor. They create clouds. Okay, so when the sun cools, we always see an increase of volcanic activity. All right, so now we have the seeds for clouds in the air, right? The aerosols. So they create clouds. So when these cosmic rays zip through the clouds, when they come down in showers. They don't come down in single points like bullets. They come down in radiant showers. So they zip through the clouds, adding energy to the clouds. Because remember, these cosmic rays, they're traveling at near light speed, and they're electric, right? They're positrons, neurons, atomic nuclei, right? So when they add energy to the clouds, it's called cloud nucleation. It's rapid cloud formation. These storms get, they grow to gigantic size almost overnight, and that's why we're seeing around the planet. That's why we're seeing record numbers of rainfall around the planet. We're seeing a year's worth of rain in a week, a year's worth of rain in 24 hours, a year's worth of rain in 24 hours. Right? We're seeing more and more and more rain because the atmosphere has more energy. Right? We're going to be seeing more lightning strikes, again, because cosmic rays are adding energy. So I said it's a process to cool the planet, whereas when the volcanoes erupt, causing clouds, or causing cloud nucleation, well, then you look at history, right? And you look at during these times of deep minimums, you see increased volcanic activity. Well, these clouds block the sun, right? It's like a blanket, further blocking the sun's diminishing energy. So it's a step-by-step process.
No, I get it. That's perfect. And there's a great chart in your presentation that I'm sure anybody who watches, further videos on this will see. It's the chart by Wheeler, by Dr. Raymond H. Wheeler. He lived from 1892 to 1961. And he developed a clock to forecast recurring droughts, which coincide with colder climates. He found that every 170 years, the climate would turn colder and drier, followed by, a social mood would change to a negative. Civil wars proliferate, and economies suffer and such. So this is definitely something that I'm glad you put in your presentation. And, it is a great diagram, and people should definitely check out your presentation, or do a Google image search for Wheeler drought clock, because when you start seeing how perfect this thing is, it gets very hard to dispute, or maybe it just helps you accept and realize that we're just talking about cycles. It's just like summer and winter follow each other. Right. So do grand solar maximums and minimums. So do ice ages, basically. And so that's what we're looking at. So how are you preparing for this? And what can we, now that people have some idea what the grand solar minimum is and they can do further research, definitely download your presentation. But what's next for people? Hey, I think this could be a reality. What should people start doing who want to thrive through this difficult period, as Adapt 2030 puts it?
Right. First and foremost, start growing your own food. That's key. Like I said, there's nothing more important than your ability to put food in your mouth 3 times a day. And what are you going to do if the grocery store doesn't have food? What next? You have no other option to get food. Food is the glue that keeps us civilized. So start growing your own food. Like Diamond always says, is you have to fail to learn how to do it. And I'm growing my first garden right now. I'm trying out aquaponics. I've got anything I plant around my property is something I can eat or I can use in some capacity. First and foremost, start learning how to grow your own food. Now, you don't have to accept the GSM before you grow your own food. You can do both simultaneously. What I constantly tell people is it's my goal to just pique your interest enough to do your own research. Try and prove me wrong. And then that's essentially what I try to do. Is I stumbled upon David Dubine, Adapt 2030, and I thought, there's no way this could be true. How am I hearing about this on YouTube? This is ridiculous. So it's absurd. So I jumped in to try and make myself a subject matter expert in an attempt to poke holes in his story. And through my journey, I've contacted Dave, and we talk pretty regularly. We're working on some other projects together, and I've got tremendous amounts of respect for him and all the GSM presenters. Particularly, I've been in contact recently with Jake Riley from the GSM channel. A really nice guy. I'm going to be interviewed on his show this Saturday, and I've been talking with Christian also. So I don't talk with Diamond as much because I think he's got so much going on. But I'm trying to connect with all the GSM presenters to try and create some kind of unification. Because me, I'm just a subscriber. I'm just like you, just like everyone else listening right now. I'm just a subscriber who's had a unique opportunity to be in a position to hear everyone's work and summarize everyone's research. I lost my train of thought.
Preparing.
So what can people do? First and foremost, grow your own food. Second to that is I always argue that safety and security is just as important, or if not more important, than learning how to grow your own food. Because if you can't protect it, then someone with a gun is going to take it from you. First and foremost, food. Right. Second is protecting yourself. Nice hat. Right. So it's almost. I'm very comfortable around firearms. I've spent quite a number of years and combat zones. So for someone who is scared of guns or uneasy, or it's almost more dangerous to own a firearm when you're untrained or undertrained. Whereas I would say if you can only do one thing to protect yourself and you're scared of guns, then buy a dog. Get a German Shepherd, get a trained bite dog. One of my close friends owns a dog training business, and I'm happy to promote his business. It's caninesspecialist.com. He trains bite dogs, family-friendly bite dogs, and so that's safety, security, and growing your own food go hand in hand. You need to protect what you have, or someone will come and take it from you.
Yeah, we have to learn through doing. I've actually been an organic. I was for a brief time. I was an organic farmer, and so that was a huge wake-up call to what that entails. People often think, "Oh, I'll be a farmer." No, it is a righteous pain in the ass. There is so much more to it. People think, "Oh, you just plant seeds, right?" Well, what about the expense of land? If it's almost not free, you can't afford to farm. Water, where are you going to get that? Can you get that? Who's going to buy it? Do you have any idea what it takes to weed an acre every day? So there's so much more to it. And so I think that, as you referenced, Diamond said you have to learn through failing. If you want to have chickens, get them. Start doing it. If you want to be a gardener, if you want to do hydroponics, actually start doing it, because the idea that after the situation becomes difficult that you're going to start doing these things, you're dead. Forget it. It's not going to work. There's so much to learn beforehand, and right now we can learn when it's easy. The more you learn about the Grand Solar Minimum, you realize what a candy store of opportunity you live in. Everything is cheap. You can do anything you want right now, and you can get ready. And really, it's just living a better life. It's living the life that our ancestors lived. So it's being happier, healthier, and wiser, and having your own mind and understanding the world, the context that things are happening in. One thing about, you mentioned learning about this on YouTube. You're like, I can't believe I'm learning about this on YouTube, but I think it's something people are realizing. So you've got your mainstream media, however one may define that, and all of what that entails. Really, yeah, you are learning about it on YouTube, because I tell you right now, people, they're lying to you. This is where the truth is, and they're doing it on purpose. And if you want to know about alternative media, here's one to touch on before we wrap up that I think is important. Alternative media, the hunger stones in the Czech Republic. Can we touch on those? Now, there is alternative media from the past trying to tell you something about what's happening right now.
Right. Before I touch on that, let me go back to it, because we've already mentioned it twice, and so it's I always say that I'm standing on the shoulders of geniuses, and everything I say, I'm just kind of parroting, what they have, what I've learned from them. Well, one can't learn all this stuff without developing their own theories and ideas and perspectives, and I don't want the value of YouTube or the value of YouTubers or interviewers to be diminished, because we're living in a time right now where, like I said earlier, it's the sum of human knowledge is at our fingertips. Right? We have the internet. Right? We have everything that we've ever learned about every culture, every historical event, past, present, and who we're going to be in the future is now available for the first time ever. We have the internet, and it's again, once you have a big lens, broad perspective, you can see how the internet has evolved. Right? It's the same principle as Moore's law. If you just look back at the big picture, every single thing in our universe operates through Moore's law. It's just a series of going faster and faster and faster. Everything's speeding up. So if you look at technology or the subject of communication, it operates through Moore's law as well. So this isn't just YouTube. You're not just a presenter. You are at the pinnacle here of communication. Whereas we have everything that we've ever learned and created as a species. Now we're able to talk about on this level, right? We don't have to go get a PhD. We don't have to get a master's. We don't have to sit in an auditorium and get a piece of paper that says we learned something. No, we can learn through each other. So it's through Moore's law, where it's through the GSM presenters and the icons of the internet have risen above. It's what I was telling Jake today. We had the same exact conversation, where internet is essentially the biggest poll the audience kind of endeavor. Remember that old show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, when they had the four lifelines, and you poll the audience, and that option always was the best, because collectively we know more than one person. So that's what the internet is. It's collectively, right? If your show is terrible, well, then you're going to get no ratings and downvoted. You'll go away. But if your show has value and merit, and it puts out good information, well, we're at that phase of our evolution where this show is going to get elevated, right? It's just the bubble of human knowledge, right, is constantly expanding. Where PhD is over here, but they're one person. Whereas on this side, on the back side, we have a whole army of presenters and researchers and interviewers doing amazing work. So they're expanding the knowledge of the human bubble faster than this side where the PhDs are just doing it, one off. So don't put yourself down, or any of the presenters, don't put yourselves down, because it's not just YouTube. It's the sum of human knowledge that you're standing on.
Yeah, and it's a lot more fun to be part of what's next than part of what's falling away. So as the larger mainstream media falls away and a new form of media, collective media, you might call it, emerges, like I was mentioning, the hunger stones in the Czech Republic. It's funny, they carved, during a drought in the past, caused by sun cycles, that, hey, if you can read this, you're screwed. Well, they put it a little differently, but basically that's kind of what it said. If you're reading this, you need to, here's some things you might want to realize. So, I would say the YouTubers of today, the alternative collective media of today, really, you're in league with a lot of badasses. So yeah, definitely. I mean, check out the Hunger Stones in the Czech Republic. You're part of that group. Those people who carved that, you're there. We're saying, hey, it's time to realize what's going on. And there's something that you mentioned, I think towards the end of your presentation. Oh, and before that, as far as being armed, that's something I learned in Somalia. There were those who were armed, and there were those who were dead. It's much more complicated than that, but I would just recommend to people, something to think about. And also think about where you live. Are you in a state where you can protect yourself? If you're not, it's not optimal. I would just put that forth from my experience seeing it firsthand. You mentioned towards the end of your presentation, as we wrap this up, because we want to keep it around an hour so people can get through it and get motivated and learn about the grand solar minimum. You mentioned science. I believe it was something like science and scientists have failed humanity. Did you mention that?
I did. It's a science. So I've been saying this for a little while, that science and scientists have failed us as a species, because there is clear evidence that the data is being manipulated. The temperature readings, the temperature markers are located in places where they're heat islands. For example, there's ocean temperature gauges that have been found in landlocked states. There's CO2 monitors that are placed at tailpipe level at bus stops in cities. So the data is corrupted. And whether the scientists know this or not, there's clear evidence that they have an agenda, that they are pushing global warming. There's an organization called the IPCC. It's UN, United Nations, International Panel on Climate Change. Now, the UN is not your friend. UN is not a friend of the United States. So it's their objective. If you read about Agenda 21, I'm not going to jump too far on that side, but read about Agenda 21 to learn what their objective is. Now, global warming is an offshoot of Agenda 21. So they realize that the sun is active. The sun is producing a lot of sunspots. The sun is going through a maximum period. All right, it's called the modern warm. So they're going to ride that wave of global warming, right? So the sun has been getting hotter. The planet has been getting hotter. There's no doubt about that. But the politicians were blaming it on man versus the sun. So the scientists who work for the IPCC, they're human beings also, right? They have bills, they have, families, they have mortgages, they have to pay, feed their families as well. So whether they knew that they were part of this or not is irrelevant, because they've steered away from the scientific process. Instead of analyzing the data, the facts, and then presenting the facts, they have an agenda beforehand where these politicians told them to fit global warming into anything that you're doing in order to get your funding. If you don't prove that global warming is happening, well then, if you don't prove that man-made global warming is happening, well then you don't receive funding. And I've seen dozens of interviews and read dozens of papers of scientists who disagree with that, who have been fired. And their voice is essentially muted, they're discredited, they're labeled climate deniers, right? Well, no one's denying that climate is changing, right? There's no such thing as a climate denier. All we're saying is we take issue with the means at which it's changing. And that shouldn't be contested, right? The way science works is you have an idea, you have an hypothesis, you figure out a way to measure your hypothesis, you conduct your experiments, and at the end of the experiment, at the very end, it doesn't matter if you were right, if you were wrong. The only thing that matters is at the very end you learn something. And that's where science has been corrupted. They've removed their ability to be objective, where they have an agenda going into it, and they manipulate the data all along the way to fulfill their objectives. So that's why I say scientists and science have failed us as a species, because there's nothing more important than the sun. There's a reason why every ancient civilization has worshipped the sun. Because they understood how important it was, and we have lost sight of that. We've lost sight of that in a big way, and it's going to bite us in the ass pretty hard here soon.
Yeah, and we are in an unfortunate situation where science, like all truth-seeking, there's this forced, false, supposed 97% consensus that the official story is the truth, and if you veer from that at all, you're evil. You don't even have the right to exist, basically. And I've always thought science, like truth-seeking, it's like a brawl, and it should be fun. If there's one thing I like about watching European Parliament, even though it's really painful, I love the fact that they brawl about it. They get in arguments, fist fights, but the conversation does continue to some extent. I mean, it's very controlled also. But still, we need to get back into the ring, get back into the brawl, get back into life, and, we just keep putting out the truth, just keep putting it out and change the consensus. Because once I think enough of the consensus changes and people, their natural instincts are telling them something's not right, like in the Adam and Eve story, right. Which is definitely something people should read. Read it before you go to bed. It makes for great nightmares. And do that. And one of the things it mentions in the Adam and Eve story is Eve knew. So ultimately, our intuition knew. So something's telling you, if you're listening to this, something's not right. So figure it out. This may very well be an aspect of what you're feeling. Let's help to change the consensus. So when supposedly the 97% say this is how it is, they're just ignored. Make the mainstream media irrelevant faster.
But the thing is that whole 97% consensus thought has been debunked again and again and again and again and again. It's wholeheartedly been debunked because that 97%, most of those people weren't even scientists. They're IPCC employees, right? They're being paid by the UN to agree to this consensus. And the thing is, that's not how science works. Science isn't a vote. I included a quote from Albert Einstein in the presentation where I say, or Einstein says, not one experiment can prove me right, but only one can prove me wrong. Or he says hundreds. I'm not reading it right. It's on the global warming section of the presentation.
Yeah, it's on there. It's like I think hundreds of experiments cannot prove me right, but one can prove me wrong.
Yeah, that's
along those lines.
And that's exactly, and that's how science works, right? Hundreds of people can't prove him right because he already proved himself right. But only one experiment can come along and disprove all of his life's work. And that's how science is supposed to work. It's open-minded, it's objective, it's purely factual. It's black and white. This is the information, and then we decide, what it is. You can't go into it with an agenda to have your science prove your agenda right, and that's where science and scientists have corrupted. They've failed us as a species because this minimum is unlike previous minimums. During this minimum, all four of the sun's magnetic fields, right? All four. When they flip, that's when you have the reduced activity. So for the first time, going back hundreds of years, Dr. Zarkova predicts that all four are going out of phase. Now, during the monger minimum, only two were out of phase. This time, all four are going out of phase. So this minimum is going to be unlike previous minimums. It's going to be far more cold. It's longer, it's deeper. It's going to be much more harsh, and we've lost sight of what's truly important. And like I said, we're going to get bit in the ass pretty hard on this one.
Yeah, but each individual out there listening, how hard you get bit in the ass, it really is up to you. We're definitely not helpless, and we can help those who have ears to hear. And it seems that more people than we might expect have the ears to hear. I mean, I know I can tend to be a little bit cynical, and especially having lived in a city, I lived in Seattle for many years, kind of a temple of weakness. And with that, you're living with a city full of people who are, praying for their own enslavement, and they worship ignorance. I guess I'm probably pretty biased, but still, don't lose heart.
Yeah.
Keep fighting. At least for yourself and those who you care about. So
yeah, I mean, I wrap up my presentation where I talk about it's a beautiful planet. I mean, this planet is amazing. I mean, and we're just along for the ride. I mean, we think we're masters of the universe. We have cell phones, we drive cars, we have air conditioning. I mean, but that can all go away in a blink of an eye with one massive solar flare. We're fragile species. And we don't realize what's important until it's taken from us, right?
No, absolutely, that's true. Yeah, it really helps you when you see it from that perspective. You realize the sweetness of life, and every day is better, greater experience. Because planets like humans are fragile. Tomorrow it might not be here, so live today because this is it, as far as you know.
Yeah, we're all on this planet together. That's the message I really try and. Through all of my online communication, I don't get into debates over global warming, and I always try and convey positivity. Just try and just lead by example. What I'm doing is it's difficult. It's really difficult to paddle upstream by myself on this. But as I'm paddling, I'm picking up friends and colleagues along the way that are all going in the same direction. So I'm feeling a sense of community. So it's nice.
Yeah, definitely. So, well, Let's wrap it up. So we've been talking with Scott Chapman today on Radiant Creators, and Scott Chapman's got he's got supergsminfo.com. You really should go and download his presentation and continue following his work and following the work of others that are basically bringing light to the Grand Solar Minimum. This is what's now. It's what's next. Join the team and come in for the big win. So where can people get a hold of you?
Sure. Yeah. So my website is supergsminfo.com. I'm pretty active on Twitter. My Twitter, I always forget what it is. It's Charles. It's at Charles Scott GSM. At Charles Scott GSM. I use a pseudonym.
Yeah, Charles Scott GSM on Twitter. Yeah, and all this info we'll definitely link to it in the show notes to make it easy.
Yeah. And I'm pretty transparent about who I am, my background, everything. I even include my LinkedIn profile on my website. I don't really post any videos on YouTube, but what I've done on YouTube is I've created a folder with all of this essential, I call them puzzle pieces. Through my years of reading this stuff, I've saved all these videos and I put them in one folder. I call them GSM puzzle pieces. So if you go to my YouTube, you can watch all those videos of the key videos to understanding what's really happening. So if you just want a super long detailed version, just jump onto YouTube and watch. A lot of those videos are from Diamond, DAP 2030, GSM channel, ISH Farmer. Anyway, so I also have a Facebook page that I operate. It's Super GSM Info Facebook page. I've kind of taken a break this past month. Can't lean too far one way or the other, so I gotta stay grounded and catching up on chores. So I haven't been very active this past month.
Yeah, I got to work on getting that garden going. It's spring. Time to grow.
Yep.
Well, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for listening to Radiant Creators. Check out more content at radiantcreators.com. If you like the show, give it a like. Share this. Comment. Keep the conversation going. You can also find us at alternatecurrentradio.com, where there's this show and a lot more.